You can have everything, success, comfort, even love, and still feel a quiet emptiness inside. It's the kind of silence no noise can cover. Not depression, exactly. Just the sense that something is missing, something deeper. Maybe you felt it too. It's not about what's wrong out there. It's about what's unresolved in here. And in that space, where we usually distract ourselves, something sacred is waiting, the beginning of a deeper life. A life shaped not by what happens to you, but by how you meet it from within. This isn't just spiritual poetry. It's a truth echoed by ancient sages and modern science alike. Your outer world is a reflection of your inner state. The Buddha taught, with our thoughts, we make the world. Today, neuroscientists show how perception is colored by attention, emotion, and belief. You don't see the world objectively. You see it through the lens of your conditioned mind. Fear finds threats even in safety. Gratitude finds beauty even in hardship. That's why the real turning point in life doesn't begin with changing your job, your relationship, or your routine. It begins when you realize none of those things will bring lasting peace unless your mind knows how to receive them. A restless mind turns even love into anxiety. A trained mind turns even difficulty into insight. This is what makes your inner world matter. The quality of your thoughts, the emotions you feed, the stories you carry, they don't just shape how you feel. They shape what you notice, what you expect, what you attract. If your inner world is filled with scarcity, the world looks empty. If your inner world is rooted in presence and care, the world begins to feel like home. Of course, this doesn't mean pretending everything is fine. Life isn't always fine. Grief is real. Injustice is real. But even these, especially these, invite us inward. The mind, left untrained, resists pain with panic, anger, or denial. But a mind that's been observed with patience begins to soften. It doesn't push pain away, it holds it gently and transforms it. Buddhism calls this inner work bhavana, the cultivation of the mind. But even outside of Buddhist language, this is a universal path. Jesus said, "The kingdom of God is within you." The Stoics reminded us, we are not disturbed by things, but by the view we take of them. Carl Jung wrote, "He who looks outside dreams. He who looks inside awakens." To awaken from within is to reclaim authorship of your life. Not control, but presence. Not perfection, but clarity. That's why the first step is not out there. It's right here, inside you. Not someday. Not once you've figured it all out. Now. So begin again, not with a goal to chase, but with a truth to remember. The life you long for begins in the mind you cultivate. The mind is the mirror. What you feed, you become. The mind is not a storage unit. It's not just a place where thoughts sit until we use them. The mind is active, alive, constantly shaping what we see and how we feel. It's more like a mirror, reflecting whatever we place before it again and again, until the reflection becomes all we know. If you spend your days feeding your mind with fear, fear of loss, fear of judgment, fear of not being enough, those thoughts don't just stay in your head. They start to tint every experience. A compliment begins to feel like pressure. A silence becomes rejection. A new opportunity feels like a threat. Not because any of those things are true, but because your mind has been trained to expect pain, to see through the lens of defense. But the same is true in reverse. If you begin feeding your mind with presence, kindness, and intention, the mirror starts to shift. You begin noticing things you used to overlook. The softness of morning light, the warmth of a friend's laughter, the way silence can feel like peace instead of punishment. Life hasn't changed, but your perception has. And perception is reality, at least for the one perceiving. The Buddha spoke often about the power of perception. In the Dhammapada, he wrote, "We are what we think." All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. Modern psychology affirms this. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, for example, is based on the idea that thoughts influence emotions, which influence actions, which shape our lives. This cycle begins in the mind and can be redirected there too. But most of us never intentionally choose what we're feeding our minds. We consume whatever's closest: news that provokes, conversations that drain, content that agitates. We scroll endlessly, not realizing that every image, every story, every voice is planting a seed. Some seeds grow into clarity and connection. Others grow into anxiety, resentment, or numbness. Either way, the mind doesn't filter for truth or goodness. It reflects what it receives. This is why Buddhist practice places such emphasis on guarding the sense doors, being mindful of what you allow in through your eyes, ears, and even your attention. Because what enters stays, and what stays begins to shape. This isn't about shutting yourself off from the world. It's about curating the world within you, choosing what to allow space to grow. It's the same reason why gratitude is such a powerful practice. Gratitude isn't about pretending life is perfect. It's about choosing which part of reality to amplify. When you pause to notice what's good, even if it's just the smell of coffee or the kindness of a stranger, you're feeding your mind a different message: that life has beauty, that you are not alone, that not everything is broken. Over time, these small moments become the dominant pattern, not because you ignored the bad, but because you gave attention to the good. This is not a denial of reality. It's the most honest way to live in it. Because reality is vast, complex, and multi-layered. What you focus on becomes your truth, not the only truth, but your lens on it. And while you can't always control what enters your life, you can begin to choose how to meet it. This is the real power of mind training. It's not about creating a fantasy or tricking yourself into being happy. It's about tuning your attention toward what supports your growth, your balance, your presence. Just like an athlete trains the body, or a musician trains the ear, the mind can be refined, gently, consistently, with care. You don't have to start big. In fact, the most powerful shifts often begin in small ways. Turn off one source of negativity. Choose silence over noise once a day. Replace one complaint with a note of thanks. Sit for 5 minutes and simply observe what thoughts arise. Not to judge them, but to see clearly what you've been feeding your mind. This alone is revolutionary. In Buddhism, this is called right thought, a core part of the Eightfold Path. But you don't need to memorize a doctrine to live it. You just need to become intimate with your inner landscape. To become the one who chooses what seeds to plant and what to stop watering. This is the art of mental cultivation. And it begins now, in this moment, with whatever thought you are allowing in next. There's a Cherokee story that's been told and retold across many cultures. A grandfather tells his grandson, "There are 2 wolves inside me. One is angry, jealous, and afraid. The other is kind, generous, and calm." The boy asks, "Which one wins?" The grandfather replies, "The one you feed." It's a simple story, but one that carries the same truth taught by sages and psychologists alike. You become what you feed. You see what you expect. You live what you rehearse. So feed your mind like you would feed someone you love. Carefully, consistently, with gentleness. Because the quality of your mind determines the quality of your life. And this life, this brief, beautiful, mysterious life, deserves to be seen clearly. Not through fear, not through habit, but through the eyes of a mind. You have chosen one thought at a time. Planting seeds of peace. Cultivating thought with intention. If your mind were a garden, what have you been planting there lately? Most people never pause to ask that question. They wake up, scroll through a flood of opinions, absorb the noise of the news, compare their lives to 1,000 curated images, and wonder why their hearts feel restless. But the answer isn't complicated. The mind is fertile ground, and it grows whatever you plant, intentionally or not. We live in a culture that encourages passive consumption. We take in so much without asking whether it's nourishing or harmful. Just as food affects the body, thoughts affect the mind. And just like junk food can leave you bloated and foggy, junk thoughts, envy, judgment, anxiety, resentment, can leave your inner world agitated and heavy. The trouble is, these mental patterns don't just come and go. They leave roots. And over time, they grow into moods, then habits, and eventually become the lens through which we experience life. In Buddhist practice, this is why mental cultivation, bhavana, is essential. You don't just meditate to escape. You meditate to tend the soil. You meditate to see what's growing inside you without your permission. And once you see it, you begin to choose differently. That's what intention means. It's not willpower. It's not forcing positivity. It's gently returning again and again to the thoughts that support peace, clarity, and compassion. This cultivation doesn't require dramatic change. It begins with awareness. Like a gardener who starts by noticing the weeds, you begin to observe which thoughts pull you toward agitation and which ones help you settle. Perhaps you notice that every time you replay a mistake, your breath shortens, or that when you imagine being appreciated, your shoulders drop. These are not small things. These are the signs that your mind is listening and that it wants peace, even if it's forgotten how to find it. When the Buddha taught about right thought, he didn't mean always think nice things. He meant recognizing which thoughts lead toward well-being and which lead toward suffering. Thoughts rooted in greed, hatred, or delusion cause harm, even if they're familiar. Thoughts grounded in generosity, kindness, and clarity create peace, even if they're uncomfortable at first. The goal isn't to police every thought, but to slowly shift the climate of your inner world. Imagine walking through a garden where someone has planted only thorns. The air is harsh, the path is narrow, the scent is sharp. Now imagine walking through a space where there's been care, flowers bloom, trees offer shade. There's space to breathe. That's what it feels like inside a cultivated mind. Life still brings storms, but your roots are stronger. The soil is healthy. You are not thrown by every gust of wind. Of course, you can't control which thoughts arise. The mind is wild and often unpredictable, but you can choose which ones you water. You can choose which ones to let pass like clouds across the sky. Not every thought deserves your attention. Some were planted by fear, some by childhood wounds, some by a culture that benefits when you feel small. The act of choosing gently, without judgment, is where power begins. You might wonder, how do I plant better seeds? You don't need a guru. You don't need to renounce the world. You start by noticing what brings calm. Maybe it's a quiet walk, a moment of stillness before bed, the sound of your child's laughter, a line from a book that makes your heart feel open. These are seeds. They may seem ordinary, but they carry the energy of mindfulness. When you let them in fully, not just as passing moments, but as truths, you are reshaping the inner landscape. You can also plant seeds through speech. What you say to yourself becomes your mental climate. If every mistake is met with, "I'm so stupid," you are planting self-judgment. If every challenge is met with, "This is hard, but I'll grow from it," you are planting resilience. Words are not neutral. They are nourishment or poison. Choose carefully. Even small phrases can become powerful anchors. The Buddhist practice of loving kindness uses phrases like, "May I be at peace. May I be safe. May I live with ease." These aren't affirmations meant to convince you. They're invitations. Each time you say them, you are planting something soft where something harsh used to live. Over time, this changes you, not instantly, but deeply. The same is true with what you expose yourself to. You are constantly being shaped. If your daily environment is loud, harsh, competitive, or cynical, it takes a toll. That doesn't mean you have to escape your job or cut off the world. But it does mean you can create moments of refuge, mental spaces where kindness is the default, not the exception. This could be a meditation corner, a playlist of teachings that restore you, a book that reminds you who you are. Every conscious input is a seed. This is the opposite of toxic positivity. You're not pretending things are okay when they're not. You're practicing discernment. You're deciding, moment by moment, where to place your attention, what to feed, because what you feed grows. There's a beautiful line from Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh. Every time we take a step mindfully, we are planting seeds of peace. That includes mental steps too. When you catch yourself spinning in worry and choose to breathe instead, you are planting peace. When you feel judgment rising and choose to pause instead of lash out, you are planting peace. When you sit with your discomfort rather than numbing it, you are planting peace. And slowly, those seeds begin to bloom. Your inner world becomes less like a battlefield and more like a sanctuary. Not because life is easy, but because you are rooted in a different soil. You know what you're planting. You know what you're feeding. And because of that, you begin to see differently. Not because the world has changed, but because your eyes have. That's the power of cultivating thought with intention. It doesn't make you someone else. It helps you return to who you were before the noise, before the fear, before the world taught you to doubt your own light. That's the gift of a cultivated mind. Not perfection, but peace. Not a life without problems, but a heart that knows how to grow even in the dark. Turning suffering into wisdom, walking the path with compassion. Pain is not the enemy. In fact, pain is one of our greatest teachers, if we know how to listen. Yet most of us have been taught to fear suffering, to treat it as a failure, a punishment, or something to be avoided at all costs. We numb it, deny it, distract ourselves from it. But suffering, unacknowledged, doesn't go away. It grows quietly in the background, shaping how we see the world, how we treat others, and how we treat ourselves. And only when we turn toward it, not away, do we begin to understand its true message. In Buddhism, the first noble truth is not that life is only suffering, but that suffering is an inevitable part of life. The second truth is that suffering arises from attachment, from our clinging to how we think things should be. And so, the practice is not to eliminate pain, but to meet it with awareness and eventually with compassion. That is how suffering becomes wisdom, not through avoidance, but through gentle attention. Think of the most transformative moments in your life. Were they the easy ones? The times when everything went according to plan? Or were they the moments that broke you open, that forced you to question who you were, what really mattered, and how you wanted to live? For most of us, it's the second. It's the heartbreak, the loss, the failure, the grief. These are the crucibles in which character is formed, but only if we are willing to stay with them long enough to hear what they're trying to say. Staying with suffering does not mean wallowing in it or glorifying pain. It means creating enough space around the experience to see it clearly. It means holding it with curiosity rather than judgment. It means asking, what is this trying to teach me? Instead of, why is this happening to me? And that shift from victim to student is what transforms suffering into wisdom. This approach is not unique to Buddhism. Across spiritual and psychological traditions, we find the same principle, that growth is possible through adversity, but only with the right relationship to it. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychologist, wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." His insight didn't come from theory. It came from the depths of suffering most of us cannot imagine. And yet, from that place, he discovered meaning. Meaning does not erase suffering, but it transforms it. And one of the ways we create meaning is through compassion, not just for others, but for ourselves. When we experience pain, our instinct is often to judge. I shouldn't feel this way. I should be stronger. I should be over this by now. But suffering asks us not to be harder. It asks us to be softer. To meet ourselves with the same kindness we would offer a dear friend. This self-compassion is not indulgent. It's necessary. Because only when we feel safe inside can we begin to learn from the pain rather than run from it. Thich Nhat Hanh once said, "No mud, no lotus." Without the mud of suffering, the lotus of wisdom and compassion cannot bloom. In this way, every painful experience becomes a potential path, not a detour, but the way itself. When we resist this, when we tell ourselves that pain is a mistake or a punishment, we cut ourselves off from its potential. But when we turn toward it with mindfulness, with gentleness, and with honesty, we reclaim our power. In Buddhist monasteries, monks are trained to sit with discomfort, not to seek it, but to understand it. A painful sensation in the body becomes an invitation to explore impermanence. A difficult emotion becomes a doorway to empathy. Over time, these practices develop not toughness, but tenderness. The ability to stay present, not only with our own suffering, but with the suffering of others. This is what makes compassion possible, not pity, not superiority, but shared humanity. And this is the heart of the path. Because to walk through suffering with open eyes is to become more human, more real, more awake. You begin to recognize the silent pain in others. The way anger often hides grief. The way distance can be a shield. You begin to soften, not only toward yourself, but toward the world. And in that softening, something remarkable happens. The wall between you and others begins to dissolve. You see that your pain is not just yours. It is part of the shared fabric of being alive. This doesn't make the pain disappear, but it changes your relationship to it. You stop asking, "When will this end?" and begin asking, "How can I carry this with care?" That is the path of the Bodhisattva, the one who chooses to stay present with suffering, both their own and others, not to fix it, but to meet it with love. That love, steady and quiet, is what transforms a wound into a well of wisdom. And perhaps most beautifully, the very places where we've suffered most deeply can become the places where we love most fully. The mother who has lost a child becomes a source of strength for other grieving parents. The person who once struggled with addiction becomes a beacon for others still in the dark. This is not accidental. It is the alchemy of compassion, the turning of pain into purpose, not because the pain was good, but because something good was grown from it. This is how suffering becomes sacred, not because we wanted it, but because we chose to walk through it with our hearts open. And with every step, we plant seeds. Seeds of understanding, of humility, of connection. Seeds that grow into wisdom, not the kind that comes from books, but the kind that comes from living. You may not have chosen your suffering, but you can choose your relationship to it. You can choose to meet it not with fear, but with a kind of quiet courage. The courage to feel, the courage to stay, the courage to be changed by it without being destroyed by it. This is not an easy path, but it is a powerful one, and it is available, always, in this moment, whenever we choose to turn toward ourselves with compassion. Because the path of suffering is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of awakening. Awaken the inner garden, visualization and becoming. Visualization is not about escaping reality. It's about training the mind to recognize what is already possible within you. In many ways, it is one of the most compassionate things you can do for yourself. Not to chase after a version of who you think you should be, but to gently awaken the qualities that are already quietly present, waiting to be invited forward. Most of us live in a reactive loop. We repeat patterns. Not because we want to, but because the mind is rehearsing old scenarios, past failures, past roles, past versions of ourselves that feel safe because they're familiar. In doing so, we unconsciously reinforce an identity shaped by pain, fear, or limitation. Visualization is a conscious interruption of that loop. It's the act of stepping into the role of gardener once more, choosing what to plant and how to tend it. In Buddhism, this process is deeply embedded in practice. The word bhavana doesn't just mean meditation, it means mental cultivation. To cultivate a quality like compassion or patience, one doesn't simply wait for it to appear. One visualizes it, breathes with it, embodies it again and again until the mind becomes familiar with it and the body follows. Think of a child learning to ride a bike. At first, they wobble, fall, and hesitate. But with each attempt, their body begins to remember. It's not the thinking that teaches them balance, it's the repetition. The same is true for emotional states. You don't become patient by reading about patience. You become patient by practicing it, by envisioning yourself acting from that place, especially when it's difficult. Neuroscience has begun to confirm what ancient wisdom already knew. The brain responds to imagined experiences much like real ones. Studies on neuroplasticity show that mental rehearsal strengthens the same neural pathways as physical action. When you visualize yourself responding to difficulty with calm or walking into a room with confidence and kindness, your brain begins to map those patterns. It becomes easier to access them in real life, not because the world has changed, but because your relationship to yourself has. But visualization is not about pretending. It's not about faking a smile or bypassing struggle. It's about creating an inner experience that aligns with your deepest intentions. And, perhaps more importantly, it's about remembering that you are not stuck, that the way you have been does not define the way you are becoming. Many of us carry quiet, hidden narratives that shape our every move. I'm not good enough. I always mess things up. I'll never change. These stories aren't neutral, they're scripts. And unless we become conscious of them, we will continue to act them out. Visualization invites us to write a new script, not through fantasy, but through intentional practice. It's saying to the mind, there's another way to be. Let me show you. This inner garden responds to attention. When you sit quietly and imagine yourself being patient with your child, or setting a gentle boundary with someone you love, or forgiving yourself for a mistake, you're not just daydreaming. You're creating a neural and emotional blueprint. The next time a similar moment arises in real life, your mind has already rehearsed a different outcome. There is a little more space, a little more choice, a little more peace. Visualization is also a doorway into compassion. When you picture someone you struggle with, and you imagine them smiling, relaxed, free from pain, you're not just sending good vibes. You're softening your own defensiveness. You're planting seeds of empathy. You're shifting from me versus you to we are both human, and that changes everything. This practice is not limited to people or moments. It can be used for qualities, too. If you long to be more grounded, more courageous, more open-hearted, you can visualize what that looks like in you. You can feel the posture of presence, the voice of kindness, the steadiness of someone rooted in peace. And you can let that version of you rise, not from ambition, but from remembering. Because deep down, these qualities are not foreign. They are your nature. They've just been buried under noise, fear, and forgetting. Visualization also reconnects you to possibility. In a world that often feels heavy with despair and division, imagining peace can feel naive. But all transformation begins with imagination. Every bridge, every healing, every invention, every act of forgiveness began with someone first seeing it in the mind before making it real. In that way, visualization is not passive. It's radical. It's the bold decision to believe that something else is possible inside you and in the world. There's a reason Buddhist teachings often involve visualizing enlightened beings. It's not because we are trying to become someone else. It's because those images reflect parts of ourselves we have forgotten. Visualizing the Buddha is not about idol worship. It's about awakening the Buddha within. Seeing yourself as calm, wise, and compassionate is not arrogance. It's spiritual memory. It's the mind saying, I remember who I really am. You don't need to sit for hours or do anything elaborate. A few minutes a day is enough. Close your eyes. Picture yourself moving through your day with grace, responding instead of reacting, listening without needing to fix, smiling with your whole face, saying no with love, holding space for someone else's pain without being consumed by it. Picture this version of you, not perfect, but present, not always calm, but always conscious. Let them take root. Over time, the boundary between who you visualize and who you are begins to dissolve. You don't just imagine compassion, you act from it. You don't just hope for peace, you embody it. And this is where the real transformation happens, not in the mind alone, but in the life that flows from it. Visualization is not about becoming someone else. It's about removing what's in the way of who you already are. The doubt, the conditioning, the fear, they don't define you. They distort you. And when you visualize your way back to clarity, you are not escaping. You are arriving. The inner garden is always there. You don't have to build it from scratch. You only have to remember how to tend it. And as you do, you'll find that you no longer have to force growth. You simply create the conditions for it. And when those conditions are met, attention, intention, gentleness, something begins to bloom. Not because you pushed, but because you remembered what's possible when you return to the soil of your being. The healing power of self-kindness. We're often taught to be kind to others, to listen with patience, to forgive, to offer comfort. But rarely are we taught how to offer that same kindness to ourselves. Somehow, being gentle with ourselves is mistaken for weakness. We believe that if we're not hard on ourselves, we'll never grow. That if we show ourselves compassion, we'll become lazy or let ourselves off the hook. But what if the opposite is true? What if kindness is not the end of growth, but the beginning of it? There is a quiet, persistent voice inside many of us, a critic, a judge, a shadow. It says we're not doing enough, not strong enough, not good enough. It tells us we have to keep striving, fixing, proving. And when we stumble, it doesn't comfort us. It punishes. Sometimes that voice sounds like a parent. Sometimes it sounds like our culture. But often, it simply sounds like us, internalized over years of subtle hurt and unmet expectations. This voice is not truth. It is a habit of mind. And like all habits, it can be unlearned. Self-kindness is not a personality trait. It's a practice, a muscle that can be strengthened, a tone we can choose to speak in. It begins the moment we decide to stop treating ourselves as a problem to be solved and start treating ourselves as someone worthy of care. The Buddha taught that no one is more deserving of your compassion than you, not in a selfish way, but in the same way that a wounded hand cannot help others if it is bleeding. When we care for ourselves, not through indulgence, but through honest kindness, we become more available, more grounded, more real in our love for others. Self-kindness is not about avoiding accountability. It's about the spirit in which we meet our imperfections. When you make a mistake, the inner critic says, "You always do this. You're broken." The voice of self-kindness says, "You're learning. Let's try again." One voice freezes you in shame. The other invites you into growth. In Buddhist psychology, this quality of kindness toward oneself is often cultivated through metta, loving-kindness meditation. It begins with simple phrases: "May I be safe. May I be at peace. May I be free from inner and outer harm." At first, these words might feel awkward or even unearned. But over time, they begin to soften the harsh edges of the mind. They become a new rhythm, a countersong to the critic within. Science supports this practice, too. Research from self-compassion pioneer Dr. Kristen Neff has shown that people who practice self-kindness are more resilient, not less. They're better able to bounce back from failure, more likely to take responsibility without spiraling into self-hate, and more emotionally available to others. In other words, compassion doesn't make you weak, it makes you strong in a deeper, quieter way. Imagine the voice you use when speaking to a child who's scared or sad. You don't yell. You don't shame. You get down to their level. You speak slowly. You remind them they're not alone. That same tone, that same presence, is what your own inner child, your own raw, human self, has been longing for. You can give that to yourself. Not once, but every time you notice the old voice returning and choose not to follow it. This isn't about turning off the critical voice completely. It's about changing your relationship to it. You begin to notice it like background noise rather than truth. You learn to pause and say, "Ah, there you are again. But I don't need to believe you today." That moment of mindfulness is enough to create space. And in that space, something kinder can emerge. Self-kindness also involves creating conditions for yourself to heal. It means resting when you're tired, saying no when something violates your boundaries, giving yourself permission to feel what you feel without apology. It means recognizing that your worth is not tied to your productivity, that your value is not measured in achievements or applause, that just by being alive, you are worthy of care. In the West, we are conditioned to measure everything: progress, success, even healing. But healing is not linear. Some days you'll feel strong. Other days, you'll feel like you're starting from scratch. Self-kindness means meeting each of those days with the same warmth. It means knowing that you are still on the path, even when it feels like you're standing still. Compassion is a way of seeing. And when you turn that gaze inward, you begin to see yourself not as a project, but as a person. Not as a set of flaws to fix, but as a being worthy of tenderness. That shift, subtle as it may be, changes everything. Because when we feel safe with ourselves, we stop living in defense mode. We stop performing. We start showing up, not as who we think we should be, but as who we really are. And here's the paradox. The more we treat ourselves with kindness, the more we grow. Not because we're pushing ourselves harder, but because we're rooting ourselves in care. And anything rooted in care grows differently, more organically, more honestly, with less fear and more freedom. The healing power of self. Kindness is not just in how it makes you feel, it's in how it makes you live. Softer, stronger, more open, more whole. And from that place, everything else begins to change. Not all at once, but seed by seed. The life you build from within. You don't have to wait for the world to be quiet to find peace. You don't have to wait for life to make sense before you begin to live it more deeply. You don't have to become someone else to come home to yourself. You've already begun by choosing to pause, to reflect, to listen inward. You've already taken the first steps on the path that matters most, the path within. This journey we've walked together was never about changing who you are. It was about remembering who you've always been beneath the noise. A mind that reflects what it's fed, a garden that grows whatever you plant, a heart that learns not through perfection, but through presence, a soul that awakens not by running away from pain, but by walking through it, gently, with compassion. We began by looking inward, recognizing that what we carry inside shapes what we see outside. Then we learned how the mind reflects the seeds we feed it, and how, with intention, we can begin to choose differently. We explored suffering not as an enemy to avoid, but as a teacher, one that, when held with compassion, gives birth to wisdom. We practiced seeing ourselves not as broken, but as becoming, not as weak, but as growing. We learned to visualize the qualities already waiting within us, to tend the inner garden with attention and care. And we practiced the radical, healing power of self-kindness, not as an escape from responsibility, but as the soil from which real transformation can grow. Now, You stand at the edge of that garden, not looking for a finish line, but sensing something more essential, that the life you want is not something to chase. It's something to nurture, day by day, thought by thought, moment by moment. From within, you will still have days of doubt. That's part of being human. But those doubts don't have to define you. They can become reminders to pause, to breathe, to return. The seeds you've planted may take time to bloom, but trust the process. Roots grow in silence. Growth is not always visible, but it is always happening. The life you build from within is not built by force. It's built by awareness, by the gentle courage to keep choosing presence, even when it would be easier to go numb, by the quiet strength of self-compassion, even when the world tells you to be harder, by the intention to see the good, not because you're naive, but because you've trained your mind to notice what's real, what's sacred, what's still possible. And if this journey has touched something in you, if a line, a moment, a pause helped you remember who you are, I invite you to continue walking it with us. This path is not mine alone. It's one we walk together, step by step, with intention, with breath, with heart. If you feel called to stay with this work, to explore more teachings like these, or to help others find their way back home, consider subscribing, liking, and sharing this message, not as an algorithmic task, but as a gesture of connection, a small offering from one seeker to another. Because the more we remember what matters, the more we return to what's real. And the more we root ourselves in peace, the more peace we offer to a world that's aching for it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for beginning again. Keep walking, gently, from within.